Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. Today I have a story for you guys. I haven't done stories lately, and that's kind of what you guys enjoy. So that's what I'm bringing you guys. Today I'm talking about a time I kind of tricked my parole officer into never coming back to my house. So we're going to get into that. And this is kind of just getting my feet wet because I haven't done a story format video in a little bit, and I'm going to have a few of those coming up. So if you like that sort of thing, be sure to like and subscribe and come on back. But with that, let's talk a little bit. So I'm going to set the stage for you. The time frame here is springtime 2019. I got out of prison in August of 2018. I had a job for a little bit. Good job. Got a car. Well, I've got a car financed. And I ended up getting into it with my mother, who I was staying with at the time. I ended up homeless, lost my job. I was bouncing around from hotel to hotel and living in my car and stuff like that. I ended up living on a friend's farm in exchange for work. And that farm was about 15 miles away from my childhood home, which I owned. However, my home was not really livable. You know, it had some serious electrical issues. It didn't have running water. And so that was an issue when it came to getting my parole transferred to my house, because your parole officer wants to do a home visit and make sure everything's cool. So that was a concern. And I also had a problem with a job because, you know, I had been applying for jobs in the area, and my applications kept getting rejected, and I had put in a lot of applications. However, I had Brandy, the friend who I was staying with, who is now my wife, I had her make copies of all my applications so I could present that to my parole officer when I saw her. But she did want to do a home visit when I got my parole transferred to my house, and I had to get that done because I was living on this farm. And I'm kind of a independent person. I don't like living with other people. I like to live in my own space, you know, and I hadn't really had my own space since I had gotten out of prison. So that was kind of a priority. It was something that I needed, and it was time to do it. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but it was time to do it. So I got my parole transferred. Now, there was an RV on the property, and I didn't really own the RV because, you know, we never got the title switched over or anything, but my old math teacher actually helped me get this RV down to the house, and that was available for me to stay in. And since, you know, some of the appliances and stuff in the RV and the lighting and etc. were less demanding from a electrical standpoint, I could actually stay in the RV. Now, I couldn't run the AC all the time or, you know, run any big appliances, but the lights worked, and I could get the water pump to work, so I could, you know, go grab buckets of water from somewhere, fill up the water tank, and I would have a shower in the RV and a toilet and stuff. So that's what I did. And the house had been sitting for a long time. You know, it was abandoned for 7 years or more while I was locked up. And the yard was completely overgrown. I needed to get that cleaned up before my parole officer came down. The only thing that I had to clean up the yard was a mechanical push mower. And by mechanical, I don't mean it had an internal combustion engine. I mean it had some sort of mechanical drive, and it was man-powered. You know, it had this helix-shaped blade on it, you know, and that was what I had to mow it. And my grass was over 6 foot tall. You know, grass, saplings, weeds, you name it. My property kind of looked like a forest. But I got that cleaned up as best I could. And I made a pathway going up to the door of the RV out of brick that I had found in the yard when I was cleaning it up, and made it look somewhat presentable. You know, I got the inside all tidied up. I moved my belongings into the RV and got it looking pretty nice. But it was still in the middle of a somewhat overgrown yard. You know, despite my best efforts at cleaning up the yard, it was still pretty messy. You know, one of the things about cleaning up this yard, I'm in southeast Kansas, and we have a variety of wildlife here. especially of the creepy crawly sort. You know, we have a lot of snakes. We have copperheads, we have rattlesnakes, water moccasins, you name it. And because my house was, or my yard was so overgrown for so long, I did have quite a few snakes in the yard that I saw while I was cleaning up the place. And one night, before my parole officer arrived, I was talking to a friend on the phone, and the only place I could get a signal was walking around in my backyard. I could not get a cell signal inside the RV for the life of me. But I was walking around the backyard, and all of a sudden, I heard a very distinct thing rattling near my feet, and it was a rattlesnake. Most likely a timber rattler, if I had to venture a guess. Now, I didn't see it because it was very, very dark. But, you know, if you've ever heard a rattlesnake, you know what they sound like. But I did not get bit by the rattlesnake. I moved slowly in the opposite direction of the rattle and, you know, steered clear of that. But there were some snakes in the yard. You know, I saw some copperheads, and I heard that rattlesnake, and I saw a few other snakes that were non-venomous around the yard. So I knew they were there, and, you know, I just had to be careful of them, you know, because when I was cleaning up the yard, basically what I was doing was destroying their habitat. You know, I had moved out all the old timber and brush and all the things that they liked, and I had gotten rid of it, and now, you know, I destroyed their habitat. So they were out in the open, more or less. So the day of my parole officer's visit arrived, and I was nervous, to say the least. You know, here I was required by my parole to have acceptable and stable housing conditions, and here I was with a house and RV that barely had electricity. The only running water I had was the water tank in the RV, and my yard was still very overgrown. I did not have a job, which I was also required to have by my parole, and so she could potentially violate me on any number of things and send me back to prison. The thing that I had going for me was that, you know, I was clean and sober, I was steady looking for jobs, and I was putting in an effort to make my house livable. I was being proactive about all the things that I needed to do to be compliant with my parole. And I was hoping that seeing my effort would make a difference and she wouldn't violate me. You know, the visit actually went pretty well, all things considered. She showed up and she looked kind of lost and confused because the house still pretty much looked abandoned, and the RV is old and it has moss growing on the sides of it. You know, it's not impressive to look at unless you're on the inside. It's really nice inside. But, you know, I went outside the RV. She couldn't find the door, so I went outside and I led her to the door. I thought maybe the brick pathway would kind of point the way, but it didn't. And we sat down and we chatted for a bit, and I explained my situation, not with the electrical, of course, because I didn't want my parole to be moved. I didn't want her to force me back into a hotel or in a situation where I was homeless, because, you know, living in the country as a homeless person is completely different from living in the city as a homeless person. It's not like you can, you know, sit outside of a restaurant and panhandle and get some money for food and then go in and buy yourself something to eat. If you're homeless in the country, it can be a much more difficult thing, you know. I explained my situation to her. I left, you know, the parts out about the electrical and stuff, but I did show her the copies of the applications that I had submitted and told her that I was trying. And I also showed her that I was going to therapy and all the stuff that I was supposed to be doing. And she was satisfied with that. She wasn't going to violate me. She could see that I was putting in an effort. She did, however, suggest that I get involved with a program called Voc Rehab that was offered by DCF in Ottawa, which is about 45 minutes away. And, you know, I'll talk about that in another video, but she suggested that I do that. And other than that, she said she was really happy. But as I was sitting there listening to her talk and conversing with her, I was observing her mannerisms. And one of the things that you learn really quickly in prison is how to read people to an extent. I don't claim to be some sort of crazy, intense person who can just tell you everything about a person by looking at them, but you can get a certain feel for people, As we were talking, I couldn't help but notice her looking around with a bit of distaste. The old RV, the overgrown yard, being out in the middle of nowhere, all seemed to make her very uncomfortable, and she seemed out of place. So she was kind of looking at everything with distaste and disapproval, as if she was afraid that the redneckedness or poverty was going to rub off on her. You know what I'm saying? This was a woman who was at home in organized, orderly, polished, well-manicured environments, not environments like the country. This was not a woman that was at home in the country. And as I was observing her, I had an idea. And we concluded our visit, and as she got up to leave, I said, "Oh, hey, watch out for snakes on your way out." And she froze. And she said, "What? Excuse me?" I said, "Watch out for snakes. I almost stepped on a rattlesnake the other night in the backyard. Snakes, there's a lot of creepy crawlies around here. You might want to make sure you don't step on any. They don't like that." And that woman was so terrified, she would not leave the RV by herself. I had to walk her back to her car. And the entire time, she was absolutely stiff with fear. Like she looked horrified. She was looking around at the ground and at everything as if the boogeyman himself was going to jump out at her. That was the one and only home visit I ever had from her. And I actually invited her back out on a few occasions when she wanted to meet me in town or something like that. I would say, "Hey, you know what? I really don't have the gas," which usually was very honest because I didn't usually have much money for gas. But I would tell her, "I don't have a lot of money for gas. If you'd like, you can come on out to my house and you can do another home visit and make sure that I'm minding my P's and Q's and all that. And, it'll be cool." And I have the yard knocked down a whole bunch more, and, I haven't even seen a snake in a few days. And her response was always, "Oh, you know what, that's fine. We'll just do a phone interview. I won't even need to meet with you. I'm sure you're doing just fine." So that is a story of how I outsmarted my parole officer and avoided future home visits from her. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I hope you guys are doing great wherever you're at. I love y'all. I will see you all later.